Oh, hello. So you and I are going to finish up the 1950s tomorrow. And I just posted the most recent outline for you. It's going to be all about, what we've been discussing. What's going on with TV, what's going on with technology and change, and is there any dissent, dear God, in this perfect time period? Yes, there is. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. But even though that's all the really fun cultural stuff to talk about, McDonald's and I Love Lucy and all that stuff, we do have to talk about some politics. So if you go to the very beginning, we already talked about the notes on social trends, but go to the election of 1952, which is going to be, of course, when Dwight D. Eisenhower is elected. So I'm going to leave the fun to our people who are giving their election ad tomorrow. But I do want to add that there's always visitors when I'm filming. Don't they know? My God, it's such a big deal. I do want you to know a couple things. First of all, right before Truman decides he's not running, and he isn't going to run, so it is an ex post facto, but right before Truman decides he's not, and right after Eisenhower, you have right before Eisenhower, you have the 22nd Amendment. And the 22nd Amendment is finally going to make it a rule, kind of inspired by FDR, who was living forever, that it's either going to be 10 years or 2 terms, and that is a final limit on the presidential administration. So you can't do more than that. And again, even though Truman isn't planning to run, they asked him to make sure it wasn't ex post facto. He would have been okay, but Eisenhower is going to, Eisenhower on, all the presidents that we have now, you either serve 2 terms or 10 years. So like if I took over, a president died, I was vice president, and I served 1 year of theirs, and then I could still go on to serve 2 full terms. Again, this is a 22nd Amendment. This is quite a big deal. And Eisenhower announces he'll be running, and of course we know he's a huge war hero from World War II. This guy is behind D-Day. He is beloved. No one knows where he is, though. Is he going to be a Republican? Is he going to be a Democrat? He surprises everybody right before by saying he, in fact, is going to run as a Republican. And this is smart because the Korean War has been going badly. Truman is a Democrat. So again, you want to be that promise and kind of the opposite of someone who's not that popular at the time, which Truman isn't because of Korea. So we're going to see what happens tomorrow with our campaign ads. Just kidding, I'll tell you. Eisenhower wins. He easily defeats Adlai Stevenson. He uses that super cute / terrifying campaign ad. I like Ike, you like Ike, all that stuff. And he does have a vice president, Richard Nixon. Oh, Richard Nixon. We're going to be talking about him a lot. You and I just discussed how after this he's going to run against John F. Kennedy. We'll cover that. And he loses. He is going to be the VP of Eisenhower. And he was known for being super tough on communism. He was buddy-buddy with McCarthy. They were friends. And the thing with Richard Nixon is he took $18,000 in campaign funds and bought private gifts for all his friends and family. So that's not outright illegal at the time, but it's certainly not going to make you look good. So people asked, what the heck, Richard Nixon, what are you doing? And he was on the news, and he did this ridiculous thing called the checkers speech. He looked into the camera, and he said, I will talk about that, but can we talk about my daughter's puppy and how much she loves it? And how his eyes are just so beautiful and brown, and we just can't get enough of this puppy. Can we talk about that? And just like if I showed you a little picture of a puppy, everybody goes, "Aw," and they forget about the $18,000 in campaign funds. He was tricky. He was tricky, Richard Nixon. He knew what he was doing. So he slides out of this one, and he says, if I bought that, puppy with that money, how wrong could that be? And everyone's like, okay, puppy, I guess we forget about that. But man, you are not going to slide out later with Watergate. Sorry, Richard, not going to happen. Okay, so now let's talk about Eisenhower's Cold War policies. At the bottom of the page there and going on. Eisenhower's Secretary of State is a guy whose name is Dulles. And John Foster Dulles, obviously, if you've flown into Washington, D.C., you have an airport named after him. So if you have an airport named after you, you must be a big deal, right? He takes this containment policy and he shakes it up. He makes it much, much more aggressive. And he takes containment and ups the ante and turns it into something called brinkmanship. And it is what it sounds like. Remember our Cold War line we said that we have, and you go to that line and you're right there. Dulles takes, like, his toe is on the line. Dulles' toe is like over the line. Like, no, you're not supposed to do that in elementary school. Dulles does it. This means go to the very brink or the very edge of war. And the whole idea of this is that you don't actually go to war because the stakes are so high, because now they're atomic hydrogen bomb high, right? Like they're crazy. So it means that if you make super strong threats, basically they're so scary that nothing will happen. because it's basically the world ending, right? If you actually use this. So you say, I'm going to blow you all up, and then someone won't do something. This is okay, I guess, but what if someone calls your bluff? If you've seen Footloose, like when you're playing chicken and two cars drive at each other, what if one car doesn't swerve? Then everybody dies, right? And that's what's happening here. These are the stakes, to quote our video today, the Daisy ad. So this is very risky. And again, the weird mentality is you're threatening full war in the hopes that that's so terrifying that there will be no war. But again, what if the USSR calls our bluff? Dulles comes up with brinkmanship. He also comes up with something called massive retaliation. Massive retaliation says if we are presented with a serious conflict, like we use everything in the kitchen sink. So we don't respond with like a tank or like one bomb. We use everything we have. We use our arsenal of atomic weaponry to respond. And again, this makes our stance more aggressive technically, but the whole hope is that we will, because the threat is so big, not have any conflict. I feel kind of weird saying this in a video that's going to be on YouTube. Maybe they're going to look into me. But let's talk about the CIA, right? The CIA is going to be started in 1947 by J. Edgar Hoover. Do not mix him up with Herbert Hoover, okay? And there's actually a movie where Leonardo DiCaprio plays J. Edgar Hoover. He is a very troubled, complicated individual. And you have to be a certain type of person to be in charge of the CIA, right? So he gets extremely, extremely aggressive, as the CIA does behind him, by fighting communism around the world. And again, the CIA is this organization that has basically no rules. So they do something and they can almost do anything because we don't hear about it, right? We don't know. So someone gets assassinated in a country and it looks like someone else did it. It could have been our CIA, but there's no proof. And that's the whole thing. There is no proof, so it cannot be traced back to us. So this allows us to meddle and to fight in communism and terrorism and stuff down the road, but then diplomatically, it is not traced back to us. And we are going to get involved in lots of places because of this. Guatemala, Iran. We're going to overthrow communist governments in both places. This is going to, again, be doing weird things, directing funds, but the funds don't have our name on it. It's an offshore account. Who knows if it's really us? Someone assassinates somebody, but really, is it an American? I don't know. It's a fake name on the passport. Go where your crazy Born Identity, all those movies take you. This is what we're talking about. This, were we really there? Was it really us? And it's that thing, if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, did it fall? If we did something in a country, but there's no proof, did we do it? That's the kind of thing the CIA is going to be doing. And again, we have economic interests in these places. We're fighting communism in these places. But this is a pretty scary precedent. And also, the people we're going to back who are anti-communist aren't always going to be good people. So sometimes in a country, there will be these two groups trying to take power, and we just choose the anti-communist option. Well, sometimes the anti-communist option is quite scary. Sometimes it's a dictatorship. Sometimes it's really violent. But we don't look too closely because all we care about on their resume is that they're not communist, right? We're going to continue to talk about the CIA. They go after the likes of Martin Luther King, thinking he was communist. They were definitely very involved, definitely very aggressive at this time. So hopefully they're not watching this video. Hopefully they don't come after us tomorrow. Okay, so big change in the Cold War. Joe Stalin's going to die in 1953. So big Cold War changes. In comes Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev is going to basically form the Soviet Union's version of NATO, and that's the Warsaw Pact, except it's not voluntary, and he forces all the satellite nations to be a part of it. And this solidifies that control of Eastern Europe and those satellite nations altogether even bigger. Poland and Hungary kind of are testing the waters. They see a new leader, and they think now's our time to have a revolution. Now's our time to push off this communist regime. Brutally put down, violently put down, and the message is Stalin may be dead, but the USSR and its control of its satellite nations is not going anywhere. And then you have a US-Soviet summit in 1955. So if you ever see the word summit, summit means the leaders of two countries come together and have a talk. So a summit would be between Angela Merkel and Trump, okay? So a summit, two leaders of two countries come together. So Eisenhower and Khrushchev are going to meet in Geneva. When in doubt, go to Switzerland. It's very neutral. There's chocolate and cuckoo clocks, and it's, non-threatening. So they meet there. And Eisenhower is that guy who's like, listen, I know that things have been weird. I know that you've been spying on me. So think about if you have like a fight with a friend and things have been awkward. You've been weird. She's been weird. And you're like, I gotta clear the air. So you're like, hey, you know what? things have been awkward, haven't they? Now, this could go one of two ways. This can go, the friend says, oh my God, of course they have. I'm so glad that you brought it up. And then like you've grown and it's great and you put it behind you. Or the friend can be super weird and catty and be like, what are you talking about? Things haven't been weird. And then you're like, oh gosh, okay, we're just going to pretend there's not an enormous obese elephant in the room and whatever. So Eisenhower's like, hey, I know we're both spying on each other. Like, I'm spying on you, you're spying on me. It's clear. And Khrushchev's like, what are you talking about? We're not spying on you. And it's like, oh, but we've caught your spies and you've caught our spies. So like, why are we pretending? Why are we lying? Obviously, this backfires. And Eisenhower wanted this thing called open skies, where we would basically both like be able to fly over each other's country, both see what's going on. And the whole idea is with more communication, with transparency, there is trust. But like any relationship without communication, when Khrushchev shoots this down, and literally they're going to shoot down planes of ours like Gary Powers and stuff, and that's in the movie Bridge of Spies. When this happens, the relationship's doomed because there's no communication and it's really bad. So this summit was supposed to make things better with our relationship with the USSR. It makes things worse. And later on, they're going to shoot down one of our planes in 1960. We exchange for one of their spies in 1962. Like, obviously, we're both spying on each other. But no one is adult enough to say, why don't we, like, talk about this? Why don't we fix it? Some Cold War hotspots. What you have essentially is a vacuum where these colonial countries were controlling their colonies, and now they're leaving, right? So when they are leaving, we know that these countries where there used to be, you know, France, or there used to be Great Britain, and now they're saying, hey, countries in Africa, hey, countries in Asia, you're now on your own. Well, guess what? With this happening after World War II, with a lot of these European countries realizing that they don't have the power they had, then you have, in the direct aftermath of them pulling out of these countries, instability, right? They're not going to be like raring to go and perfect. Think about us once Great Britain left. We were hardly in tip-top shape. In these areas, lots of these nations are now demanding free governments, want to overthrow this European influence. We see conflicts, and where we see conflicts, we also see the threat of communism because, again, they're not that strong. One of those places is Vietnam. Vietnam was known as Indochine, which is French for Indochina. So think of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Altogether, the French had that, right? There's actually a really great movie called Indochine, and where Catherine Deneuve stars in it. It's in French, if you're interested. So France is going to give this up in 1954. It's been a bloody struggle. The people of Indochine want to be free, and they're like, we don't have it in us anymore. We just dealt with World War II. Okay. So France does this thing that they think is a great plan. They're like, hey, we will divide you into two areas, North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And when you're stable, we will allow you to have your own governments. And then North Vietnam becomes communist and South Vietnam becomes democratic. Does this sound familiar? Oh yeah, this sounds exactly like Korea. How did Korea end? It was a failure. Should we do this in Vietnam? No, we should learn from Korea, but it doesn't happen. So what we have happen is in the north, you have a Ho Chi Minh take control. And then in the south, we are going to get behind this guy whose name is Diem. Now, Diem is no good. Diem is going to be a dictator. His people hate him. But again, all we care about is that he's not communist. We get involved and we start inserting people because Eisenhower has this very convincing argument called the domino theory. And the domino theory, think about a stack of dominoes. He says, okay, first the USSR, then China. Then if we don't make a stand in Vietnam, there will be all these other Vietnams. He says that Southeast Asia is going to basically just get knocked over by communism. There's going to be this domino effect. It's going to grow in the world, and we can't let that happen. So we start to get involved in Vietnam, and we'll talk more about that with John F. Kennedy. And then we also form SEATO. So SEATO's like NATO, but for Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. We're going to be in it, Britain, New Zealand, France, Pakistan, Thailand, Philippines, all these places. And this is in 1954. It's to keep Southeast Asia free of communist control. And in Vietnam, obviously, Ho Chi Minh in the north has a dream to unite them all, and there's going to be a war. And this is going to look a lot like Korea, have the same sad ending as Korea that's ambiguous, and we will get there later. The Middle East also becomes an enormous mess here. Number one, we don't want the Middle East and its surrounding areas to become communist. And number two, there's oil in the Middle East. There's so much tension still in our world today, not just because, oh, it's the Middle East. It's because there's oil and so many countries depend on the Middle East for that energy, right? And when we talk about, going more green and doing stuff like that, it's not just to save the environment. It's also to reduce kind of these international tensions and things like that. So we know there was drama there because you have this Jewish state of Israel, right? So in 1948, Israel declares its independence, and you have major tension between the Jews and the Arabs escalate. When this happens, the UN comes in and draws a line. Now, we still know about that today. This is very confusing, and it's just basically everyone attacking everyone. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon and Iraq attack Israel. Israel is a military beast. Israel is extremely strong. If you were a young woman in Israel today, we would all serve in the army. Like, everyone has to be trained in the army. These women learn how to operate like enormous guns and do crazy training. They have a huge military. Egypt gets mad once this happens and Israel is going to win. They basically start flirting with the Soviet Union for power. The Soviet Union is going to give it to them. We don't like that. We withdraw economic aid from Egypt. Egypt wants to punch back at us, so they close the Suez Canal, which is how that oil gets access to Britain and France. And Israel is upset about all this and attacks Egypt. It's a mess, right? But here's the difference. We are the number one power after World War II. Eisenhower comes and blows the whistle and says, knock it off. And amazingly, people listen. And it shows our stance now in the world after World War II. And it shows that, Europe can't bite the hand that feeds it. Britain and France are going to listen to us. A lot of these countries are going to listen to us because we're giving them so much aid with our Marshall Plan type, like, plans for food and plans for military and stuff like that we're giving them. And then I told you every president during communism has a doctrine. Truman was for Greece and Turkey, you're right. The Eisenhower doctrine, of course, is applied to the Middle East. He basically says we will provide aid and help for any country trying to fight communism in the Middle East. And then we talked about the rest of this section in class. So I hope you guys have a great Monday. We have 4 days left before break, and I'll see you tomorrow.